And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I commend the Prime Minister for his very fine words. And on behalf of the Coalition and Federal Opposition, I extend to you, President Marcos, a very warm and hearty welcome and greetings. Your Excellency, to you, to Her Excellency First Lady Marcos, and to the entire Republic of the Philippines delegation. Australia welcomes you, our Parliament welcomes you, and of course our people warmly welcome you. Millions of Australians will watch your address today, Mr President, and when they do, they will not only see the face of a foreign leader, they will hear the words of a dear friend of Australia. And if words carry sentiments across land and sea, then to you and through you, Mr President, I send my best wishes to the friendly, faith-fortified and fearless people of the Philippines. 78 years ago, in the main square of Manila, an American flag was lowered and the flag of the Philippines was raised. As a new republic was born, a newly inaugurated president addressed his countrymen and marked the forward thrust of the frontiers of freedom. It was on that day, the 4th of July 1946, when President Rojas joyfully declared that the Filipino people had reached the summit of the high mountain of independence. It was indeed a long and arduous historic climb, from ancient communities occupying a vast archipelago to colonial rule under the Spanish, from a revolt against the Spanish to becoming the subjects of the United States, from occupation under the Imperial Japanese forces to American liberation and the final steps of stewardship towards sovereignty. When President Rojas delivered his speech, he knew the challenges of nation building that awaited his fellow Filipinos. Only weeks earlier, he'd outlined the hurdles ahead: a country in ruins from war, a people beset by unemployment, hunger, disease, inflation and housing inadequacy. Yet the President at the time was optimistic. He said, if we conquer the obstacles which bar our way, our people will grow great in the eyes of men. The Philippines aspires to greatness. President Marcos, today you lead a nation and people who no longer need to aspire to greatness because the Philippines is a great country by any measure of the word. Your nation and your people are truly great in the eyes of Australians. Indeed, only 33 years after your country attained independence, our 22nd Prime Minister was on your soil attending a dinner hosted by your father, President Marcos Sr. Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser spoke with admiration about the development of the Philippines and described Manila as one of the great cities of the world. Mr President, the bonds between our peoples were forged amidst the hell of the Second World War. Within the Australian national consciousness is an enduring admiration for both our nation's forebears who served and sacrificed to liberate the Philippines. As the Prime Minister rightly pointed out, a handful of Australian prisoners of war escaped from Borneo to your islands and joined your guerrillas. Thousands more of our sailors, airmen and signals intelligence officers supported General Douglas MacArthur's military operation. Indeed, at the MacArthur Memorial Landing Park in Leyte, the names of 92 Australians who gave their lives for liberation are recorded on a monument. Ever so poignantly, only last year, the wreck of the prisoner ship SS Montevideo Maru was found on the northern coast of the Philippines. If there is any solace in that tragedy, it is that almost 1,000 Australian souls have their resting place in the waters which belong to our Filipino friends. From our partnership in war has emerged a camaraderie between our two peoples. In the 1950s, under the Colombo Plan, Filipino students came to this country to further their education. The 1970s saw many Filipinos migrate to Australia for work. First generations beget subsequent generations, and today, Mr President, our nation is so proud to be home to more than 400,000 Australians of Filipino ancestry. Indeed, Filipino-born migrants constitute one of our largest migrant groups. Just as Australia is home to many Filipinos, the Philippines is home, of course, to many Australians. And importantly, Mr President, the pipeline between our two countries flows seamlessly both ways, a pipeline which carries people, businesses and commerce. The term friendshoring might be new, but deepening trade and investment with long-standing and trusted partners who share the same values is not a new concept. And in these uncertain times, Mr President, there is much that Australia and the Philippines can continue to do to strengthen our supply chains. As you correctly observed during your address at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies last year, economic security is national security. And of course, Mr. President, we find ourselves in times of emboldened autocrats and belligerent regimes who show utter contempt for sovereignty, law and liberty. Your country shows and knows a resolve because your country knows that the threats are real. For many years, the Philippines has been on the front line, subjected to grey zone activities. And I commend you for your personal resolve, Mr. President, for you and your country's courage in calling out acts of coercion and the Philippines' steadfast commitment to international law. Last year, you received much applause for your remark in your State of the Nation address when you said, "We will protect our sovereign rights and preserve our territorial integrity in defence of a rules-based international order." Mr. President, these words of yours encapsulate an imperative for all nations who cherish peace, prosperity and the preservation of civilisation itself. Together then, with our many partners and friends in the region, we must all continue to speak up with courage in calling out acts of intimidation and interference. We must all maintain our strenuous efforts in diplomacy, and we must all especially lift our individual efforts to support the collective goal of integrated deterrence. I thank you most sincerely, Mr. President, for your emphatic support for AUKUS, as you appreciate the work of AUKUS seeks to complement the efforts of other nations in the region to uphold sovereignty, security and stability, and most importantly, to preserve peace. The centrality of ASEAN is often spoken about and the central role it plays in regional affairs. In these precarious times, I hope that defence deterrence will be at the very centre of discussions at next week's ASEAN Summit. Mr. President, you are truly a great guest and friend of our country. You are honoured today by a very grateful friend in our nation, and with our friendly words, we welcome the words of a friend most dear.
Yeah.